picked up something that was maybe just a little bit too heavy for you and feel like your body was going to break? I think I can assume at some moment in our lives, we've all experienced this. It's in these moments that we realize how important it is to prepare our muscles before we do any kind of strenuous exercise. This is also the reason why athletes prepare their muscles and stretch and train before they do their strenuous exercises. In fact, according to the Journal of Physical Education and Dance, one sport in particular has a combination of flexibility, strength, and endurance required of one sport that equals or exceeds that of most of other professional sports. This sport is dance. With the high physical demand for dancers' bodies to have high flexibility, endurance, and strength, there also comes an increased risk for injury. Now, stretching helps to reduce this injury because it alters the viscoelasticity of the muscle tendon unit, which results in less stiff tissues. So when these less stiff tissues are strengthened and they're stretched, it allows these muscles to be able to take more force, which therefore increases or reduces their chances of getting injured because they're stronger. Now, in order to look at the best types of stretching for dancers, it's important to understand the different types of stretching methods. One of the most common types of stretching is called static stretching. Now, in static stretching, this is mostly, when someone thinks of stretching, they most likely are thinking of static stretching. And in static stretching, an athlete holds a certain position for about 15 to 20 seconds at their furthest point that they can hold that stretch. Now, another common type of stretching is dynamic stretching. Now, dynamic stretching has definitely gained more popularity within the past few decades as being an effective method of stretching. And it differs from static stretching as it is a more faster paced and repetitive type of movement. And within, like, some examples of dynamic stretching are jumping jacks or high knees. So in order to understand what would be the best method of stretching, whether dynamic stretching or static stretching for dancers, it's important to look at the background information on this topic. So I decided to look at just the general view of what stretching method is more effective. So the research conducted by the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine analyzed the effects of static stretching versus dynamic stretching within general and activity-specific warm-ups. This study found that there's a 94% improvement in both static and dynamic stretching when they're paired with an activity-specific warm-up. So it's important to look at the specific activity for that sport along with the stretching method. So the other research I found on this topic comparing the different types of stretching was, one of them was conducted by the University of Belgrade, and it was focused on basketball players, and it found that there was no significant effect when dynamic stretching was used for these basketball players on their performance, but there were negative acute effects when static stretching was implemented, which means that over a short period of time there were smaller but more, but it showed more improvement than dynamic stretching. Also for soccer players, there was the research conducted by soccer players by the National Center of Medicine and Sciences found that there's an increased jump height for soccer players when there's dynamic stretching was implemented, and there was no improvement in jump height when static stretching was implemented. And then another research conducted by the Bangladesh Journal of Medical Sciences found that when Pilates stretching, which is very similar to dynamic stretching, that's why I included this, significantly improved hamstring flexibility because they focused on the hamstring flexibility within football players, and that static stretching had little improvement. So the study conducted by the Bangladesh Journal of Medical Sciences was very influential in my personal research project focusing on dancers because it focused on a specific muscle for football players. And so I used this information to realize that I need to focus on a specific muscle. Now, leg strength is extremely important for dancers' overall well-being. Now, it's the dancer's leg strength that helps them to have better balance and improves their turnout, their technique, and it helps them to jump higher. And overall, when their legs are stronger, it reduces the stress that is on their other joints. Now, I decided that one of the bigger muscles in a dancer's legs that's important to look at is also their hamstrings. So I also decided to look at dancers' hamstrings, similar to how the Journal of Bangladesh looked at football players' hamstrings. So you can see their muscles, This is a very big, the hamstring is a large part of their muscles that they use. So after looking at the background research, you can see that there is a gap missing for the most effective method of stretching for dancers. They were all focused on soccer, basketball, football, even track, but none focused on dancers. Especially there wasn't any research focusing on dancers' hamstrings specifically. So a research study with the question of is static or dynamic stretching more effective in increasing the flexibility of dancers' hamstrings is important to fill that gap in the research. So in order to conduct this research, I had to decide which research method would be most effective. At first, I considered doing a more qualitative type of approach, and this is more of a field research study, which I would interview the dancers, kind of survey them after doing different stretching methods, see how they felt the stretching method affected their body, if they felt less sore after they completed it. And I also considered a more quantitative approach, which was just be measuring the dancer's flexibility without surveying them and doing a survey style. There's also, I also considered an integration style method, which takes into consideration both qualitative and quantitative. So I'd measure them, but I also would survey them. But I ended up deciding on a within subjects design research method, where all the participants in a sample are exposed to 2 different types of treatments. And so and then you measure the outcome or the effects. And so in this case, it would be the different type of stretching methods, and then the outcomes would be the increase in flexibility. And I chose this research method mostly because the research conducted by the Journal of Bangladesh and the Medical Science of Bangladesh also found or used this same type of experimental research method, and it proved beneficial in being able to give a definitive answer on which stretching method was more effective. So to analyze how the flexibility, to measure the flexibility, I used a dynameter. And so you can see I placed it, this is, they're doing a hip flexion. And so I would place the one part of the dynameter to the axis of their body, and then when they raise their leg up, you measure how far they can bring their leg up. This is a commonly used tool by physical therapists, sports scientists. And so I also used a sit and reach box, where you can see the participant puts their feet flat up against the box, and then they reach over, there's a little piece of plastic there, and they push the piece of plastic, and you measure how far they can reach over. And so these 2 tools were used to measure the flexibility. I intended to have at least 8 dancers within my study, but I was unfortunately not able to have 8 dancers just because I was trying to stick with an age range between 14 to 18. And so this was, I ended up with 5 dancers, but this is still a significant research study just because I was able to make sure that all my stretching, when I used the tools, that they were more accurate because I didn't have so many people in my study. So I had the dancers do a pre-test, where I measured their flexibility of their hamstrings, and then they completed the different stretching exercises, which was either static or dynamic, and then I stretched them, or I measured them afterwards. And so you can see if there's a large or a long amount, then you can set their flexibility increased significantly with that type of stretching method. And even if there's a negative value, it shows that their flexibility actually decreased after they did that stretching method. So after looking at the results, I did collecting the data, I did a 1 sample t-test to determine which stretching method was more effective in increasing the dancer's flexibility. And I found that static stretching proved to significantly increase hamstring flexibility within dancers, and that dynamic stretching actually did not increase hamstring flexibility. Now this was actually counter to what I was expecting, because all the other research, if anything, they leaned towards dynamic stretching as being more effective, just because they said it warmed up muscles and it showed more effective for other sports, but in dance it actually showed the opposite effect. So my research showed that over a short-term period, static stretching is a more effective method of stretching for dancers. Now, although my research was very credible, there are some limitations to what I could have done in my research. One of them being there's a small sample size, like I said, so I cannot generalize this for the whole population of dancers because I focused in on such a small group. But this research method can still be used, and this design can be implemented within a larger population, so we can generalize for dancers. Furthermore, the resources that were available, there are other like measuring devices that are more expensive. There's like an online denimeter, which can be more precise just because it is an online tool and it's not as variable as like a human actually completing it. And so that was just another limitation, as it's an online method could have been more precise. And so I have some recommendations for further research to be conducted in this field. And I think in order to further this discussion on dancers, the best stretching method for dancers is doing it over a long period of time. I focused more on a short period of time. They only completed the tests on certain days, like a couple days. And so doing it over a long term of time, even looking at like for certain months, or like doing it completing over months, could be beneficial to see what dancers should regularly be stretching with. Also, different measuring devices could be used, like I said, more like the online denimeters that are more precise. And also looking at different muscles, like I focused on the hamstrings, you could also focus on the shoulders, like different muscles in the body, so you can look at the overall well-being of the dancer. So the implications of how my research method can affect the literature on this discussion is that we need to focus on like dancers' bodies and their well-beings, because there's not very much research on dancers in particular, as there's still a prejudice against like dancers not being as athletic as other sports. So there's more research on other sports. So it's important to further the discussion on dancers' bodies. And so this research method and design can be used on a broader scale and help be used as like a building block for further research on dancers' bodies. So thank you.
Thanks. Portia, we have a few questions for you.
So how did the choices you made when designing your research method impact your research process?
So when I did my research method, like I said, I originally wanted to do more of a qualitative and quantitative approach. And so I thought being able to communicate with the dancers on like if a certain method like helped them to feel better, because sometimes you feel physically better, but your actual muscles don't actually, they might not be as flexible. But it changed after looking into the research from the University of Bangladesh, because they did it more within like the subject's design. And so this influenced my research, because I realized that it could be counteractive if I did both qualitative and quantitative. So I decided to just go more of a quantitative route.
Next, what are the real-world implications or consequences related to your findings?
So, like I just explained, the real-world implications of these findings are that even though I did have a small sample size, so I can't generalize it to the population, this can still be used as like a building block for further research. They can implement this same style, the same design, but just have more participants. Even looking at professional dancers, because I looked at more recreational dancers and competitive dancers. So implementing it for professional dancers could be very helpful and just increase the discussion about dancers' well-beings in their bodies.
If you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
If I could revisit my research process, I would like to have done it more long-term. Originally, I was just trying to look at short-term, because like before competition, you're like, what would be the best stretching method? Because you're just trying to decide like right at that moment, what should I do? Because you're about to go on stage, you need to prepare your body. But I do wish that I could have done it over a longer period of time if I had more, like I said, participants, but also just the availability of the dancers to come in more often. I think this could have been effective to decide what would be a more effective stretching method for dancers.